In the grand halls of Westbourne Palace, where centuries of tradition echo through marble corridors and crystal chandeliers cast shadows that have witnessed the rise and fall of monarchs, a single moment of betrayal would shatter the very foundation of the royal family. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, during what should have been a routine family gathering. No cameras were rolling, no press was present, and no official records would ever document what transpired. But in that instant, when Queen Isabella deliberately turned her back on Princess Margaret during the most vulnerable moment of her life, the future of the Westbourne dynasty changed forever. King Edward, who had spent 40 years believing he understood the delicate balance of power within his own family, was about to discover that the woman he had married carried secrets that would make him question everything he thought he knew about loyalty, love, and the true cost of wearing the crown. The morning mist hung low over Westbourne Palace gardens as Queen Isabella stood at the towering windows of her private study, watching the groundskeepers tend to the rose gardens that had been her passion project for nearly 2 decades. At 58, she had perfected the art of appearing serene, while her mind calculated every political move 3 steps ahead. The heavy silk of her burgundy dress rustled softly as she turned away from the window, her attention drawn to the stack of correspondence waiting on her mahogany desk. Among the usual diplomatic letters and charity requests lay a single envelope that made her stomach tighten. The royal seal of Eastmarch, their neighboring kingdom, was pressed into deep blue wax. Isabella's perfectly manicured fingers hesitated before breaking the seal, though she already knew what the letter would contain. Prince Adrian of Eastmarch, heir to their throne, and exactly the kind of political alliance that could secure Westbourne's future, was formally requesting permission to court Princess Margaret. Isabella had been orchestrating this moment for 3 years, carefully nurturing relationships with Eastmarch's royal family through cultural exchanges, trade agreements, and diplomatic visits. Princess Margaret, King Edward's younger sister, was 26 and possessed the kind of natural charm and intelligence that would make her an ideal queen for any kingdom. More importantly, she was unmarried and, until recently, had shown little interest in settling down with anyone who met the royal standards for marriage. The queen's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile as she set the letter aside. Margaret had always been Edward's favorite sibling, the one person who could make the typically serious king laugh until tears ran down his cheeks. Their bond had been forged in childhood when their parents died in a tragic riding accident, leaving 12-year-old Edward to inherit the crown with 8-year-old Margaret as his only remaining family. Isabella had observed their relationship with careful attention throughout her marriage, noting how Edward's protective instincts toward his sister often overrode his political judgment. But Isabella had learned long ago that sentiment was a luxury the crown could not afford. Westbourne needed this alliance with Eastmarch. Their kingdom's economy had been struggling with recent crop failures and the rising cost of maintaining their extensive military presence along the southern borders. Prince Adrian's marriage to Margaret would bring not only substantial financial benefits, but also access to Eastmarch's advanced agricultural techniques and their strategic position along the major trade routes. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside her study made Isabella quickly slip the letter into her desk drawer. She recognized the distinctive rhythm of her husband's gait, slightly favoring his left leg where an old war wound sometimes bothered him during damp weather. King Edward entered without knocking, a privilege he had maintained throughout their 19-year marriage despite Isabella's gentle suggestions that even royalty should observe certain courtesies. Edward looked younger than his 42 years that morning, his dark hair still thick though streaked with premature silver at the temples. He wore simple riding clothes rather than formal court attire, suggesting he planned to spend the day outdoors inspecting the estate or visiting the stables where he kept his beloved horses. His green eyes, so strikingly similar to Margaret's, held the kind of contentment that Isabella had learned to associate with mornings when no immediate crises demanded his attention. "The council meeting has been moved to this afternoon," he said, settling into the leather chair across from her desk with the casual familiarity of long marriage. Lord Chancellor Blackwood received word that the Northland ambassadors are arriving a day early. Apparently, their ship made better time than expected crossing the channel. Isabella nodded, already mentally rearranging her schedule. The Northland delegation was crucial for finalizing the mining rights agreement that would help offset their recent financial difficulties. I'll have the kitchen staff prepare the formal welcoming feast for tomorrow evening instead of Thursday. Will Margaret be joining us for the negotiations? Edward's expression brightened at the mention of his sister. She should be. Margaret has been studying the Northland trade contracts for weeks. Her insights into their banking systems might prove invaluable. He paused, studying his wife's face with the kind of attention that had made him an effective ruler. You seem preoccupied this morning. Is everything well? For a moment, Isabella considered telling him about Prince Adrian's letter. In the early years of their marriage, she had shared most political correspondence with Edward, seeking his opinion and building the foundation of trust that had made their partnership so effective. But this situation required a more delicate touch than her husband's straightforward nature typically allowed. Edward's protective instincts toward Margaret might lead him to reject the proposal without proper consideration of its political benefits. Simply the usual concerns about the Northland negotiations, she said, which was true enough to avoid being an outright lie. Lord Blackwood seems confident about the terms, but I worry about the long-term implications of giving them extended mining access. Edward leaned forward, his expression shifting into the focused attention he brought to all matters of state. For the next 20 minutes, they discussed the technical details of the mining agreement, the potential environmental impacts, and the delicate balance of maintaining friendly relations with Northland while protecting Westbourne sovereignty. It was the kind of conversation that had convinced Isabella during their courtship that Edward would make not just a good husband, but an excellent king. When their discussion concluded, Edward stood and moved around the desk to kiss her forehead in a gesture of affection that had become routine over the years. I'll be in the stables until lunch. The new mare from the Greyfield breeding program arrived yesterday, and I want to assess her training progress. After her husband left, Isabella retrieved Prince Adrian's letter and read it again carefully. The formal language could not disguise the genuine enthusiasm behind the proposal. Adrian had met Margaret during the Spring Cultural Festival, and their public interactions had been marked by easy conversation and shared laughter. More importantly, Isabella's network of ladies-in-waiting and court observers had reported that Margaret seemed genuinely interested in the prince's company. The alliance would solve multiple problems simultaneously. East March's agricultural innovations could help Westbourne recover from their recent crop failures. Their strategic location would provide new trade opportunities, and the marriage would produce heirs who would unite two kingdoms, creating a powerful alliance that could dominate the region for generations. But Isabella knew that presenting the proposal to Margaret would require careful planning. The princess had inherited her brother's stubborn independence and had previously expressed skepticism about marriages arranged for political convenience. 3 years earlier, she had firmly declined a proposal from the Duke of Riverside, despite the significant financial benefits such an alliance would have provided. Margaret had argued that marriage should be based on mutual respect and genuine affection, idealistic notions that Isabella privately considered naive, but publicly supported. The key would be ensuring that Margaret believed the choice was entirely her own. Isabella had already planted seeds during previous conversations about Prince Adrian, mentioning his intelligence, his dedication to his people, and his progressive views on education and women's rights. She had arranged for Margaret to receive detailed reports about East March's cultural achievements and their innovative approaches to governance. Most importantly, she had ensured that Margaret and Adrian had multiple opportunities to interact naturally during diplomatic events. Isabella spent the remainder of the morning crafting a careful response to Prince Adrian's letter, neither accepting nor declining his proposal, but suggesting that a formal courtship period would allow both parties to become better acquainted. She worded the reply to suggest that the initiative was coming from King Edward himself, a small deception that would make the proposal seem more legitimate when she eventually presented it to her husband and sister-in-law. As the palace bells chimed noon, Isabella prepared to join the family for lunch. She had learned to approach these meals as opportunities for careful observation and subtle influence. Margaret's moods and opinions often revealed themselves most clearly during informal family conversations, providing Isabella with the information she needed to guide future decisions. The informal dining room, where the royal family took their private meals, was Isabella's favorite space in the palace. Smaller than the grand banquet halls used for state occasions, it featured tall windows overlooking the rose gardens and comfortable furnishings that made conversation flow naturally. Margaret was already seated when Isabella arrived, her auburn hair catching the afternoon sunlight as she reviewed a leather-bound journal filled with her neat handwriting. Research notes for this afternoon's council meeting, Margaret explained when she noticed Isabella's curious glance. I've been corresponding with economists in 3 different kingdoms about sustainable mining practices. Some of their findings might influence our negotiations with the Northland delegation. Isabella felt a familiar mixture of admiration and frustration as she observed her sister-in-law. Margaret's intelligence and dedication would make her an invaluable asset to any kingdom, but her tendency to become deeply involved in policy details sometimes made her lose sight of broader political realities. The princess approached every problem as if it could be solved through careful research and logical analysis, an approach that Isabella had learned was rarely sufficient for navigating the complexities of international diplomacy. Edward joined them a few minutes later, still wearing his riding clothes and carrying the faint scent of horses and leather. His mood was excellent, as it typically was after spending time in the stables, and he regaled them with stories about the new mare's intelligence and spirited personality. Margaret listened with genuine interest, asking detailed questions about the horse's bloodlines and training potential. Perhaps we should consider expanding our breeding program, Margaret suggested as the kitchen staff served their meal of roasted chicken with herbs from the palace gardens. Quality horses could become another export commodity. The Kingdom of Valencia pays premium prices for well-trained mounts. Isabella seized the opening to steer the conversation toward international relations. Speaking of Valencia, I received an interesting letter this morning about their crown prince. Apparently, he's been quite impressed by our cultural achievements, particularly our music conservatory program. She watched carefully as Margaret's expression remained neutral at the mention of foreign royalty. The princess had developed an excellent diplomatic poker face over the years, but Isabella had learned to read the subtle signs of her true reactions. Margaret continued eating without any change in her posture or breathing, suggesting that the mention of Valencia's prince held no particular interest for her. Prince Adrian of Eastmarch has also been inquiring about our educational initiatives. Isabella continued casually. I understand he's implemented similar programs in his own kingdom with remarkable success. This time, Isabella caught the slight pause in Margaret's chewing, the barely perceptible straightening of her shoulders. The princess set down her fork and reached for her water glass, buying herself a moment to compose her response. When she spoke, her tone remained carefully neutral, but Isabella detected the faint warmth that crept into her voice whenever Prince Adrian's name arose in conversation. Prince Adrian has always impressed me as someone who genuinely cares about his people's welfare, Margaret said. His work with rural education programs has produced remarkable results. I've been hoping for an opportunity to study his methods more closely. Edward looked up from his meal with interest. Perhaps we should invite him for an extended diplomatic visit. A few weeks at court would give you time to discuss educational policy in detail, and I'd be interested in his perspectives on agricultural innovation. Isabella felt a surge of satisfaction at how easily the conversation had developed along the line she had hoped. That's an excellent suggestion. I could extend a formal invitation through diplomatic channels. She paused as if considering the idea for the first time. Actually, given Prince Adrian's interest in our cultural programs, perhaps we should time his visit to coincide with the Autumn Arts Festival. It would showcase our achievements while providing numerous opportunities for substantive discussions. Margaret nodded enthusiastically. The timing would be perfect. The university scholars will be presenting their latest research during the festival, and several of our master craftsmen will be demonstrating traditional techniques. Prince Adrian would gain a comprehensive understanding of our educational and cultural approaches. For the remainder of the meal, the conversation flowed naturally between topics of agriculture, education, and cultural exchange. Isabella contributed observations and questions that subtly reinforced the benefits of closer ties with Eastmarch while appearing to support whatever direction the discussion took naturally. By the time they finished eating, both Edward and Margaret were enthusiastic about hosting Prince Adrian for an extended visit. As they prepared to leave for the afternoon council meeting, Isabella felt confident that the first phase of her plan had succeeded perfectly. Margaret had expressed genuine interest in Prince Adrian's work and personality. Edward had embraced the idea of diplomatic cooperation with Eastmarch. Neither of them suspected that Isabella had been orchestrating their enthusiasm through careful manipulation of information and opportunity. The afternoon council meeting proceeded smoothly, with Margaret's research proving invaluable for negotiating favorable terms with the Northland delegation. Isabella watched with pride as her sister-in-law presented complex economic analysis with clarity and confidence, earning respectful attention from even the most traditional counselors who sometimes questioned women's involvement in government affairs. But throughout the meeting, Isabella's mind kept returning to Prince Adrian's letter and the delicate task of transforming political necessity into what appeared to be romantic choice. The success of her plan would depend on maintaining the illusion that Margaret was making independent decisions while actually being guided toward the conclusion Isabella needed her to reach. As evening fell and the palace settled into its nighttime routine, Isabella stood once again at her study window, looking out over gardens that were now shrouded in darkness. Tomorrow, she would send the invitation to Prince Adrian, setting in motion a chain of events that would determine Westbourne's future for generations to come. She had spent years learning to navigate the treacherous waters of royal politics, and now all her skills would be tested in the most important campaign of her life. The thought of what she was about to set in motion should have troubled her conscience, but Isabella had long ago learned to view such concerns as luxuries the crown could not afford. Margaret's happiness mattered less than Westbourne's survival, and Prince Adrian's genuine affection for the princess would ensure that the marriage would not be entirely without foundation. Sometimes, Isabella reflected, the greatest acts of love required the most difficult sacrifices, even when the people making those sacrifices were unaware they were doing so. Part 2, the Autumn Arts Festival, transformed Westbourne Palace into a magnificent showcase of the kingdom's cultural achievements. Silk banners and rich jewel tones hung from every balcony, while the great courtyard hosted performances by musicians, dancers, and theatrical troupes who had traveled from across the realm. The air hummed with excitement as nobles, scholars, and craftsmen gathered to celebrate the harvest season and display their finest work. Queen Isabella moved through the festivities with practiced grace, playing the perfect hostess while keeping careful watch for Prince Adrian's arrival. She had spent weeks planning every detail of his visit, from his accommodation in the palace's most prestigious guest wing to a carefully orchestrated schedule that would maximize his opportunities to interact with Princess Margaret. The invitation had been accepted with gratifying enthusiasm, and diplomatic correspondence suggested that Prince Adrian viewed this visit as far more than a routine cultural exchange. Princess Margaret had thrown herself into festival preparations with characteristic dedication, organizing scholarly presentations and coordinating with the master craftsmen who would demonstrate traditional techniques. Isabella had observed with satisfaction as Margaret's excitement about Prince Adrian's visit became increasingly obvious despite her attempts to maintain diplomatic neutrality. The princess had spent considerable time selecting her wardrobe for the festival events, consulting with her ladies-in-waiting about which gowns would be most appropriate for various occasions. King Edward's enthusiasm for the visit had grown as well, though his interests focused primarily on the agricultural and economic opportunities that closer ties with Eastmarch might provide. He had arranged for Prince Adrian to tour their experimental farming techniques and inspect the innovative irrigation systems that had helped Westbourne maintain crop yields despite recent challenging weather. Edward's straightforward nature made him an ideal ally in Isabella's campaign, as his genuine excitement about the diplomatic possibilities reinforced the visit's legitimacy. The morning of Prince Adrian's arrival dawned clear and crisp, with golden sunlight streaming through the palace windows and highlighting the autumn decorations that adorned every hallway. Isabella chose her attire carefully, selecting a deep green gown that conveyed both authority and warmth. She arranged for Margaret to wear a stunning sapphire blue dress that complemented her auburn hair and green eyes, though she presented the suggestion as a casual observation about colors that photographed well for the official portraits that would commemorate the visit. Prince Adrian's entourage arrived at midday, their carriages decorated with East March's silver and gold banners. Isabella positioned herself beside Edward and Margaret at the top of the palace steps to provide the formal welcome that protocol demanded. As the prince emerged from his carriage, she felt a surge of satisfaction at how perfectly he fit her requirements for Margaret's future husband. At 29, Prince Adrian possessed the kind of natural charisma that made him instantly likable without appearing threatening to other rulers. His dark blonde hair and warm brown eyes gave him an approachable appearance that contrasted favorably with the stern formality of many royal heirs. More importantly, his reputation for intelligence and progressive governance suggested that he would be a capable partner for Margaret both personally and politically. Isabella watched carefully as Prince Adrian greeted them, according to diplomatic protocol. His bow to King Edward conveyed appropriate respect without excessive deference. His acknowledgement of Isabella struck the perfect balance between courtesy and friendliness. But when he turned to Princess Margaret, his entire demeanor shifted in subtle ways that confirmed Isabella's assessment of his romantic interest. The prince's smile became more genuine when he looked at Margaret, his formal posture relaxing slightly, as if her presence put him at ease. Margaret's response was equally revealing. Her diplomatic composure remained intact, but Isabella noticed the slight flush that colored her cheeks and the way her eyes lingered on Prince Adrian's face as he spoke. The attraction between them was obvious to anyone who knew how to read such signs, though neither had yet acknowledged their feelings openly. The welcoming ceremony proceeded smoothly, with Prince Adrian expressing appropriate admiration for the festival preparations and his eagerness to learn about Westbourne's cultural achievements. Isabella guided the conversation toward topics that would showcase Margaret's knowledge and interests, mentioning the princess's role in organizing the scholarly presentations and her extensive research into educational innovations. Princess Margaret has been particularly interested in comparing our approaches to rural education with the programs you've implemented in East March, Isabella said as they moved through the palace corridors toward the guest wing. I believe she has prepared quite an extensive analysis for your consideration. Prince Adrian's eyes brightened with genuine interest. I would be honored to discuss such matters with Princess Margaret. Her reputation for scholarly excellence has reached even our distant kingdom. I've been hoping for an opportunity to benefit from her insights. Isabella felt another surge of satisfaction as she observed Margaret's pleased reaction to this compliment. The princess had spent years developing her expertise in educational policy, and recognition of her intellectual achievements always delighted her more than praise for her beauty or social graces. Prince Adrian's obvious respect for her scholarship would make him far more appealing than suitors who seemed interested only in her royal status. The afternoon was devoted to a tour of the festival exhibitions, with Isabella orchestrating the group's movement to ensure that Margaret and Prince Adrian frequently found themselves walking together while examining various displays. She arranged for Edward to become engaged in detailed discussions with festival organizers, requiring him to linger at certain booths while the younger royals continued ahead. These separations appeared entirely natural while providing the privacy that would allow genuine conversation to develop between Margaret and the prince. Isabella's strategy proved brilliantly successful. By the time they reached the manuscript exhibition, where illuminated texts from the palace library were displayed alongside contemporary scholarly works, Margaret and Prince Adrian were deep in animated discussion about literacy programs and their social implications. Their conversation flowed with the easy enthusiasm of two intelligent people discovering shared interests and compatible perspectives. The correlation between literacy rates and economic development is particularly striking in rural communities, Margaret was saying as they examined a beautifully illustrated treatise on agricultural techniques. Our research suggests that basic reading skills can increase crop yields by nearly 15% within 2 growing seasons. Prince Adrian nodded thoughtfully. We've observed similar patterns in East March, but I've been wondering whether the benefits extend beyond immediate practical applications. Do literate farmers show greater innovation in problem solving? Are they more likely to experiment with new techniques? The conversation continued for nearly an hour as they moved through the exhibition, with both Margaret and Prince Adrian clearly enjoying the opportunity to discuss topics that passionately interested them with someone who could match their level of understanding. Isabella followed at a discreet distance, occasionally contributing observations that kept the discussion flowing while avoiding any appearance of eavesdropping. As evening approached, the festival's focus shifted to musical and theatrical performances in the palace's grand ballroom. Isabella had carefully planned the seating arrangements to place Prince Adrian beside Margaret during the concerts, while positioning herself and Edward nearby to maintain proper supervision without inhibiting natural interaction. The evening's entertainment featured some of the kingdom's finest musicians, creating a romantic atmosphere that Isabella hoped would encourage emotional as well as intellectual connection between her targets. The first performance was a violin concerto by the royal court musician, a piece of haunting beauty that seemed to cast a spell over the entire audience. Isabella noticed that Margaret and Prince Adrian sat in comfortable silence during the music, occasionally exchanging glances that suggested they were sharing the emotional experience of the performance. During the brief intermission that followed, their conversation was quieter and more personal than their earlier scholarly discussions. Music has always seemed like a universal language to me, Prince Adrian said softly. It transcends the barriers of nationality and politics that can make diplomatic communication so challenging. Margaret's response revealed a more intimate side of her personality than she typically displayed in public settings. I sometimes think that music expresses emotions more honestly than words ever could. When I listen to a beautiful piece like that concerto, I feel as if the composer is sharing something true about the human experience that couldn't be communicated any other way. Isabella felt a thrill of triumph as she observed this exchange. Margaret was revealing her deeper thoughts and feelings to Prince Adrian, a level of trust and connection that the princess rarely offered to casual acquaintances. The prince's response showed equal openness, suggesting that he felt comfortable sharing his own philosophical reflections with Margaret. The evening continued with a series of vocal performances and a brief theatrical presentation, but Isabella paid little attention to the entertainment itself. Her focus remained fixed on the subtle interactions between Margaret and Prince Adrian, noting every shared smile, every moment of eye contact, every gesture that suggested growing intimacy between them. As the formal evening entertainment concluded and guests began to drift toward the ballroom for dancing, Isabella made her next strategic move. She approached King Edward with a suggestion that he spend time discussing agricultural innovations with Prince Adrian, while she and Margaret attended to their hostess duties with the other visiting dignitaries. The separation would appear natural while giving Margaret time to process her feelings about the prince without immediate pressure to make decisions. Edward readily agreed to the suggestion, his genuine interest in East March's farming techniques making Isabella's manipulation unnecessary. Prince Adrian also seemed pleased with the arrangement, though Isabella caught his slightly regretful glance toward Margaret as the group separated. The princess maintained her diplomatic composure, but Isabella detected the faint disappointment that flickered across her features as she realized she would not be spending the rest of the evening in Prince Adrian's company. Isabella guided Margaret through conversations with various visiting scholars and cultural ambassadors, fulfilling their obligations as hostesses while carefully observing her sister-in-law's mood. Margaret performed her duties flawlessly, displaying the charm and intelligence that made her such an invaluable asset to the kingdom. But Isabella could see that her attention kept drifting toward the corner of the ballroom, where Edward and Prince Adrian were engaged in animated conversation. "Prince Adrian seems like a genuinely thoughtful person," Isabella commented casually as they moved between groups of guests. "His approach to governance appears far more progressive than many royal heirs of his generation." Margaret nodded, her response more enthusiastic than she probably intended. "His educational programs have achieved remarkable results. But beyond that, he seems to genuinely listen when people speak to him. So many nobles simply wait for their turn to talk, but Prince Adrian asks questions that show he's actually considering different perspectives." Isabella filed away this observation for future reference. Margaret valued intellectual respect above almost everything else, and Prince Adrian's ability to engage with her ideas as equals would be crucial for winning her affection. The evening had provided abundant evidence that the prince possessed this quality, but Isabella would need to create additional opportunities for him to demonstrate his regard for Margaret's intelligence and judgment. The dancing portion of the evening provided the perfect opportunity for this demonstration. Isabella had ensured that Prince Adrian would be expected to dance with various ladies, including Margaret, as part of his diplomatic obligations. But she also arranged for him to have multiple opportunities to request dances with the princess that would appear to be his personal choice rather than protocol requirements. When Prince Adrian approached Margaret for their first dance, Isabella noted the genuine pleasure that lit up both their faces. The prince was an accomplished dancer, guiding Margaret through the intricate steps of the traditional court dances with effortless skill. More importantly, their conversation during the dance appeared relaxed and intimate, suggesting they were both enjoying each other's company immensely. Isabella spent the remainder of the evening monitoring the developing relationship while maintaining her own social obligations. She danced with Edward, and several visiting dignitaries participated in conversations about cultural exchange and diplomatic cooperation, and ensured that all guests felt properly welcomed and entertained. But her primary attention remained focused on Margaret and Prince Adrian, who seemed increasingly drawn to each other as the evening progressed. By the time the festivities concluded near midnight, Isabella felt confident that the first day of Prince Adrian's visit had exceeded her most optimistic expectations. Margaret and the prince had clearly established a strong intellectual connection and obvious mutual attraction. Neither had made any declarations of romantic interest, but the foundation for such feelings had been solidly established. As the palace settled into its nighttime quiet, Isabella retired to her private study to review the day's events and plan the remaining activities of Prince Adrian's visit. She had arranged for him to stay for 2 weeks, providing ample time to nurture the relationship between him and Margaret while maintaining the appearance that any romantic development was occurring naturally. The next phase of her plan would involve creating opportunities for Margaret and Prince Adrian to spend time together in less formal settings, where their conversations could become more personal and intimate. Isabella had arranged for riding expeditions through the palace grounds, visits to local villages where they could observe educational and agricultural programs in action, and quiet evenings in the palace library where they could continue their scholarly discussions without the distractions of court protocol. She had also planned several situations that would allow Prince Adrian to demonstrate his character and values in ways that would appeal specifically to Margaret's idealistic nature. A visit to the kingdom's primary school would showcase his commitment to education. Tours of local farming communities would reveal his genuine concern for ordinary citizens' welfare. Even casual conversations with palace staff would provide evidence of his consideration for people regardless of their social status. Isabella understood that Margaret's ultimate acceptance of Prince Adrian would depend not just on attraction and compatibility, but on her conviction that he would be a worthy partner in the serious work of governance. The princess had inherited King Edward's sense of duty and responsibility, and she would not commit herself to any man who did not share her dedication to serving their people's interests above personal comfort or pleasure. Fortunately, Prince Adrian appeared to possess all the qualities that would appeal to Margaret's sense of duty as well as her emotional needs. His reputation for just and effective governance in Eastmarch was well established and thoroughly documented. His progressive policies on education, women's rights, and economic development aligned perfectly with Margaret's own political philosophy. Most importantly, his obvious respect for Margaret's intelligence and judgment suggested that their marriage would be a true partnership rather than a mere political arrangement. As Isabella prepared for sleep, she reflected on the extraordinary success of the day's activities. Everything had proceeded exactly as she had planned, with Margaret and Prince Adrian responding to each other precisely as she had anticipated. The next 2 weeks would require careful management to ensure that their growing attraction developed into genuine love and commitment. But Isabella felt confident that her years of studying human nature and political strategy had prepared her for this challenge. The thought that she was manipulating her sister-in-law's romantic feelings for political purposes barely troubled Isabella's conscience. Margaret's happiness was important, but it was far less crucial than Westbourne's survival and prosperity. The marriage would benefit everyone involved, providing Margaret with a worthy husband, Prince Adrian with an exceptional wife, and both kingdoms with a powerful alliance that could secure their futures for generations. Isabella had learned long ago that effective leadership sometimes required making difficult choices on behalf of people who were not equipped to understand the broader implications of their decisions. Margaret's idealistic nature and Edward's protective instincts toward his sister made them poor judges of the political realities that demanded this alliance. Isabella's willingness to take responsibility for engineering their happiness, even through deception, was simply another burden of the crown that she bore for the good of her people. Part 3, the second week of Prince Adrian's visit, brought an unexpected complication that threatened to derail Isabella's carefully orchestrated plan. Princess Margaret had begun to show signs of genuine emotional attachment to the prince, but she had also started questioning the circumstances that had brought them together. Her naturally analytical mind, the same quality that made her so valuable in diplomatic negotiations, was now turning its scrutiny toward the convenient timing and perfect arrangements of Prince Adrian's extended stay. Isabella first noticed the problem during breakfast on Monday morning, when Margaret made a seemingly innocent observation about the remarkable coincidence of the prince's interests aligning so perfectly with her own research projects. The comment was delivered with the kind of casual tone that Isabella had learned to recognize as Margaret's way of testing whether people would reveal more information than they initially intended. It's quite fortunate that Prince Adrian's educational initiatives have focused on exactly the same issues I've been studying, Margaret said as she buttered her morning toast. Rural literacy programs, agricultural education, women's access to advanced learning. One might almost think someone had briefed him about my specific interests before his visit. King Edward, who was reading correspondence while eating, looked up with mild interest. Scholarly minds often focus on similar problems. It's natural that two intelligent people would identify the same areas needing improvement. But Isabella caught the skeptical glance Margaret directed toward her, a look that suggested the princess was not entirely convinced by her brother's explanation. Margaret had inherited their father's ability to detect when political maneuvering was occurring beneath the surface of apparently innocent social interactions. Isabella would need to address these suspicions carefully before they developed into outright distrust. Actually, I believe Prince Adrian's interests were well documented long before we arranged this cultural exchange, Isabella said, maintaining a tone of casual honesty. His reputation for educational innovation was one of the primary reasons we thought a scholarly dialogue would be mutually beneficial. I can show you the diplomatic correspondence if you're curious about how the visit was originally proposed. Margaret's expression suggested she was indeed curious, but she merely nodded and changed the subject to the day's planned activities. Isabella made a mental note to have Lord Chancellor Blackwood prepare a carefully edited selection of documents that would support her version of events while concealing the more manipulative aspects of her planning. The day's schedule included a visit to Westbourne's primary agricultural research facility, where Margaret and Prince Adrian would observe experimental farming techniques that had increased crop yields throughout the kingdom. Isabella had arranged for the tour to focus on collaborative projects that would naturally lead to discussions about potential cooperation between their two kingdoms. As their carriage wound through the countryside toward the research facility, Isabella observed the easy conversation between Margaret and Prince Adrian with growing satisfaction. Despite her emerging suspicions about the visit's arrangements, Margaret clearly enjoyed the prince's company and respected his insights into governance and policy development. Prince Adrian, for his part, seemed increasingly captivated by Margaret's intelligence and passionate dedication to improving her people's lives. The correlation between education and agricultural innovation becomes obvious when you see it demonstrated practically, Margaret was saying as they approached the research facility. Farmers who can read technical manuals and numerical data consistently achieve better results than those who rely solely on traditional techniques passed down orally. Prince Adrian nodded enthusiastically. We've implemented similar educational programs in Eastmarch, but I'm particularly interested in your approach to training women as agricultural instructors. The social implications seem as significant as the practical benefits. Isabella felt a familiar surge of pride in her sister-in-law's accomplishments, even as she continued to manipulate the circumstances of Margaret's personal life. The princess had genuinely earned Prince Adrian's admiration through her own intelligence and dedication. Isabella's role was simply ensuring that their mutual attraction had the opportunity to develop into something deeper. The agricultural facility tour proceeded exactly as Isabella had hoped. Margaret and Prince Adrian became so absorbed in technical discussions about soil improvement and crop rotation that they frequently wandered away from the main group, continuing their conversations in the experimental fields while examining specific plants and techniques. Isabella followed at a distance with the facility director, ostensibly receiving briefings about research results while actually monitoring the developing relationship. Their lunch at the facility provided another opportunity for intimate conversation, as Isabella arranged for the meal to be served in the director's private dining room rather than the formal conference hall. The smaller space and casual atmosphere encouraged personal rather than diplomatic discussion, allowing Margaret and Prince Adrian to share stories about their childhood experiences and their hopes for their respective kingdoms' futures. Isabella was pleased to observe that their conversation had moved beyond purely intellectual topics to include more personal revelations. Margaret spoke about the responsibility she felt as King Edward's only sibling and the pressure to serve her people effectively. Prince Adrian shared his own struggles with balancing personal desires against royal obligations, admitting that he sometimes questioned whether individual happiness was compatible with effective leadership. I've always believed that a ruler's personal character directly affects their ability to govern justly, Margaret said thoughtfully. But I've wondered whether focusing too much on personal fulfillment might actually undermine one's sense of duty. Prince Adrian's response revealed both his philosophical sophistication and his genuine interest in Margaret's perspective. Perhaps the question isn't whether personal happiness is compatible with duty, but whether genuine happiness is possible without living according to one's deepest values. A ruler who sacrifices everything for duty might become effective in a narrow sense, while losing the empathy and wisdom that make leadership meaningful. Isabella found herself genuinely impressed by the depth of their conversation, even as she remained focused on its political implications. Margaret and Prince Adrian were not simply experiencing romantic attraction. They were discovering a profound intellectual and philosophical compatibility that would make their eventual marriage far stronger than typical royal alliances based solely on political convenience. The afternoon was devoted to visits with local farming families, where Margaret and Prince Adrian could observe the practical implementation of educational programs they had discussed theoretically. Isabella had selected these visits carefully to showcase both kingdom successes while highlighting areas where cooperation might produce even better results. At the first farm they visited, they met with a young couple who had increased their crop yields by 30% after participating in the literacy program that Margaret had helped develop. The farmers spoke eloquently about how reading technical manuals and keeping detailed records had transformed their approach to agriculture, providing concrete evidence of the educational initiative's practical value. Prince Adrian asked thoughtful questions about the program's implementation, showing genuine interest in the details of how rural communities could be encouraged to embrace educational opportunities. Margaret's responses demonstrated her deep knowledge of the social and economic factors that influence farmers' willingness to change traditional practices. The key insight was recognizing that education must be presented as a practical tool rather than an abstract good. Margaret explained as they walked through fields of flourishing crops. Farmers needed to see immediate benefits from reading and mathematics before they would invest time in learning these skills. The psychological aspect is crucial, Prince Adrian agreed. In Eastmarch, we discovered that educational programs succeeded best when they were presented by teachers who had farming backgrounds themselves. People are more willing to learn from instructors who understand their daily challenges. Isabella watched with satisfaction as Margaret's eyes brightened with genuine enthusiasm at this insight. The princess had always been passionate about educational policy, but Prince Adrian's experiences provided new perspectives that clearly excited her intellectual curiosity. Their shared commitment to improving their people's lives was creating exactly the kind of bond that Isabella needed for her plan to succeed. The second farm they visited presented a different kind of lesson, demonstrating some of the challenges that even successful programs encountered. The elderly farmer had struggled to adapt to new techniques despite participating in the literacy program, highlighting the importance of patience and flexibility in implementing social changes. Margaret and Prince Adrian's response to this situation revealed important aspects of their characters that Isabella filed away for future reference. Both showed genuine compassion for the farmer's difficulties while maintaining realistic assessments of what could be accomplished through policy changes. Neither resorted to empty platitudes or easy solutions, instead engaging in thoughtful discussion about the complexities of balancing innovation with respect for traditional knowledge. As their carriage returned to the palace in late afternoon, Isabella felt confident that the day had achieved multiple objectives simultaneously. Margaret and Prince Adrian had deepened their intellectual connection while gaining practical experience working together to analyze complex problems. The visits had also provided opportunities for them to observe each other's character in real-world situations rather than the artificial environment of court festivities. More importantly, the day's activities had given Margaret concrete evidence of Prince Adrian's genuine commitment to effective governance rather than mere political posturing. The princess valued sincerity above almost everything else, and she had clearly been impressed by the prince's thoughtful questions and practical insights during their farm visits. That evening's entertainment was deliberately less formal than the previous week's cultural performances. Isabella had arranged for a small concert in the palace music room, featuring chamber music that would provide a beautiful background for intimate conversation. The guest list was limited to family members and a few close friends, creating an atmosphere that encouraged personal rather than diplomatic interaction. As the musicians performed a series of elegant pieces by court composers, Isabella observed Margaret and Prince Adrian with growing confidence in her strategy's success. They sat close together on a comfortable sofa, their conversation quiet and clearly personal rather than focused on policy or scholarly topics. Their body language suggested increasing comfort and familiarity, with both leaning slightly toward each other as they spoke. During the intermission, Prince Adrian surprised everyone by asking permission to perform a piece himself. He was apparently an accomplished pianist, and he chose a beautiful romantic ballad that he dedicated to the remarkable people of Westbourne who have made this visit so memorable. While the dedication was diplomatically appropriate, Isabella noticed that his eyes remained fixed on Margaret throughout the performance. Margaret's reaction confirmed Isabella's assessment of the developing relationship. The princess watched Prince Adrian's performance with obvious appreciation, her expression soft and admiring in a way that revealed her growing emotional attachment. When he finished playing, her applause was enthusiastic and clearly heartfelt. The remainder of the evening passed in pleasant conversation, with Margaret and Prince Adrian continuing to discover shared interests and compatible perspectives on everything from literature to philosophy to the practical challenges of modern governance. Isabella participated in the general discussion while maintaining her careful observation of their interactions, noting every gesture and glance that suggested deepening feelings. As the evening concluded and guests prepared to retire, Isabella made her final strategic move of the day. She mentioned casually that tomorrow's schedule included a morning ride through the palace grounds, followed by a quiet afternoon in the library where Margaret and Prince Adrian could continue their scholarly discussions without interruption. The library's collection of historical treatises might interest Prince Adrian, Isabella suggested. Margaret has been analyzing the evolution of agricultural policy over the past century. Perhaps you could collaborate on a comparative study of how different kingdoms have addressed similar challenges. Both Margaret and Prince Adrian responded enthusiastically to this suggestion, clearly pleased with the prospect of spending more time together in pursuit of their shared intellectual interests. Isabella felt a surge of satisfaction at how naturally they had embraced her recommendation, unaware that she was carefully engineering opportunities for their relationship to develop along the lines she desired. As the palace settled into nighttime quiet, Isabella retired to her study to review the day's successes and plan the remaining activities of Prince Adrian's visit. The relationship was developing exactly as she had hoped, with genuine affection and respect growing between Margaret and the prince. Her manipulation had been so subtle that neither of them suspected they were being guided toward predetermined conclusions. The next day would mark the beginning of Prince Adrian's final week at Westbourne Palace. Isabella planned to use this time to create opportunities for him to make some gesture that would demonstrate the seriousness of his romantic intentions, while ensuring that Margaret had the emotional space she needed to recognize and accept her own feelings. Isabella had spent years studying the psychology of courtship and marriage among royalty, and she understood that successful matches required more than mere political compatibility. Margaret and Prince Adrian needed to believe that their love was genuine and freely chosen, even though Isabella was carefully orchestrating the circumstances that allowed their relationship to flourish. The morning ride would provide them with privacy and intimacy, while the library sessions would reinforce their intellectual connection. Isabella also planned to arrange several scenarios where Prince Adrian could demonstrate his character through small acts of consideration and kindness, the kind of gestures that would appeal to Margaret's romantic sensibilities while proving his worthiness as a potential husband. By the end of Prince Adrian's visit, Isabella was confident that both he and Margaret would be ready to acknowledge their feelings for each other. The final step would be facilitating a proposal that appeared to be entirely Prince Adrian's initiative, while actually fulfilling the political alliance that Isabella had been working toward for months. As she prepared for sleep, Isabella reflected on the enormous complexity of what she was attempting to accomplish. Engineering a successful royal marriage required balancing political necessity with human psychology, cultural expectations with personal desires, and long-term strategic planning with moment-by-moment tactical adjustments. But Isabella had spent her entire adult life mastering these skills, and she felt confident that her years of experience had prepared her for this ultimate test of her abilities. The stakes could not be higher, both for the individuals involved and for the kingdoms whose futures depended on the success of this carefully orchestrated romance. Margaret's happiness mattered to Isabella, but it was secondary to the greater good that would be served by her marriage to Prince Adrian. Sometimes, Isabella reflected, the most profound acts of love require the most sophisticated forms of manipulation, especially when the people being helped were too idealistic to recognize the harsh realities that made such intervention necessary. The thought that she was potentially sacrificing Margaret's autonomy for political ends did not trouble Isabella's conscience as much as it might have in her younger years. Experience had taught her that effective leadership sometimes required making decisions that others could not understand or accept, bearing the burden of knowledge and responsibility that came with true power. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to guide Margaret and Prince Adrian toward the future that Isabella had envisioned for them, a future that would benefit everyone involved even if they never fully understood how carefully their path had been arranged. Part for the final week of Prince Adrian's visit arrived with the crisp beauty of late autumn, as golden leaves drifted across the palace courtyards, and the first frost sparkled on the rose garden's remaining blooms. Queen Isabella stood at her study window, watching the morning sun illuminate the grounds where she had spent months orchestrating what would soon become the most crucial confrontation of her reign. Today, Prince Adrian would make his formal proposal to Princess Margaret, but Isabella had discovered a complication that threatened to destroy everything she had worked to achieve. The previous evening, Lady Catherine Whitmore, one of Margaret's closest confidants since childhood, had requested a private audience with the Queen. Catherine had served as a lady-in-waiting for 3 years, and her loyalty to Princess Margaret was absolute and unquestioning. What she had uncovered would change the trajectory of the carefully planned romance in ways that Isabella was still struggling to comprehend. "Your Majesty," Catherine had said, her usual composure shaken by obvious distress, "I must speak with you about Princess Margaret and Prince Adrian. I've discovered something that I believe you need to know before any formal arrangements are made." Isabella had felt a chill of premonition as she invited Catherine to sit in the comfortable chairs near the fireplace. The young woman's agitation was completely unlike her typically calm demeanor, suggesting that whatever information she possessed was genuinely serious. 3 days ago, Princess Margaret asked me to help her research Prince Adrian's background more thoroughly, Catherine had continued. She wanted to understand his family's political positions on several issues that are important to her. I thought it was simply due diligence for someone considering a potential alliance. Isabella had maintained her expression of polite interest while her mind raced through possible implications. Margaret's desire for additional information was natural and sensible, exactly the kind of careful investigation that a responsible princess would conduct before making any romantic commitments. However, during my research, I discovered correspondence between Prince Adrian and his closest advisor that reveals his true motivation for this courtship, Catherine had said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Your Majesty, Prince Adrian is not interested in Princess Margaret personally. His affection is entirely feigned, performed to secure a political alliance that Eastmarch desperately needs." The revelation had struck Isabella like a physical blow. She had spent months engineering a romance between Margaret and Prince Adrian, confident that the prince's obvious attraction to the princess was genuine. The possibility that he was also manipulating the situation for political purposes had never occurred to her, despite her own similar motivations. What exactly did this correspondence reveal? Isabella had asked, struggling to maintain her composure while processing the implications of Catherine's discovery. Prince Adrian wrote to his advisor that Princess Margaret was sufficiently intelligent and attractive to make the deception tolerable, and that he was confident he could maintain the pretense of romantic interest long enough to secure the alliance. He described their conversations about education and governance as tedious but necessary performances that would convince her of his sincerity. Isabella had felt sick as she absorbed this information. Her careful manipulation of Margaret's feelings was one thing, motivated by genuine concern for the kingdom's welfare and confidence that Prince Adrian would make a good husband despite the political circumstances. But If the prince was also deceiving Margaret while feeling contempt for her interests and personality, the situation became something far more disturbing. "Are you certain of the authenticity of this correspondence?" Isabella had asked, hoping desperately that Catherine had somehow misunderstood or been deceived by forged documents. "I verified the handwriting against other samples, and the letter contained details about private conversations that only Prince Adrian could have known," Catherine had replied. "Your Majesty, he has been performing an elaborate charade designed to exploit Princess Margaret's trusting nature and genuine feelings." The conversation had continued for another hour, with Catherine providing additional details that confirmed the shocking extent of Prince Adrian's deception. He had apparently researched Margaret's interests specifically to manipulate her emotions, studying her scholarly work not out of genuine admiration, but to identify topics that would make her feel intellectually valued and understood. Now, as Isabella watched the morning light illuminate the gardens where Margaret and Prince Adrian had walked together just days earlier, she faced the most difficult decision of her reign. Should she expose Prince Adrian's deception and protect Margaret from a marriage based on lies? Or should she allow the engagement to proceed, knowing that it would provide the political alliance Westbourne desperately needed, even if it was built on mutual manipulation rather than genuine affection? Isabella had spent the sleepless night weighing these impossible alternatives. Margaret's happiness and dignity demanded protection from Prince Adrian's cruel deception. But Westbourne's survival might depend on the alliance with Eastmarch, and Isabella's duty to her people required her to consider their welfare above personal feelings, even Margaret's. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her brooding contemplation. Princess Margaret entered the study with her characteristic purposeful stride, wearing a beautiful morning dress in forest green that complemented her auburn hair. Her expression was bright with anticipation, clearly expecting to discuss the day's planned activities with Prince Adrian. "Good morning, Isabella," Margaret said warmly. "I wanted to thank you for arranging such a wonderful visit. Prince Adrian and I have had the most enlightening conversations about educational policy and agricultural innovation. I feel as if I've learned as much in the past 2 weeks as I had in the previous 6 months of independent research." Isabella felt her heart break as she observed Margaret's genuine enthusiasm and obvious happiness. The princess had clearly fallen deeply in love with Prince Adrian, believing that she had found not just a romantic partner, but an intellectual equal who shared her passionate commitment to effective governance. Learning the truth about his deception would devastate her in ways that might permanently damage her ability to trust others. "I'm pleased that the visit has been so productive," Isabella replied carefully, studying Margaret's face for any sign that she suspected the manipulation occurring around her. "Prince Adrian certainly seems to have enjoyed the opportunity to exchange ideas with someone who shares his interests." Margaret's smile brightened even further. "He's remarkable, Isabella. I've met many accomplished men, but Prince Adrian combines intelligence with genuine compassion in a way that's truly rare. He listens to ideas that challenge his preconceptions, and he's willing to admit when he's learned something new. I feel as if I can be completely honest with him about my thoughts and opinions." The irony of Margaret's comment was almost unbearable. She valued honesty above almost everything else, and she believed she had found that quality in a man who was systematically deceiving her about his most basic feelings and motivations. Isabella's own deception was equally manipulative, but at least it was motivated by genuine concern for Margaret's welfare rather than contempt for her character. "Have you given thought to what might happen after Prince Adrian returns to Eastmarch?" Isabella asked, testing the depth of Margaret's emotional attachment while struggling with the knowledge that she could prevent her sister-in-law's impending heartbreak. Margaret's expression became more thoughtful, revealing the careful consideration she had obviously given to this question. "I hope we'll be able to continue our collaboration on educational policy, perhaps through correspondence or mutual visits. Beyond that," she paused, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. I suppose I should wait to see whether Prince Adrian shares my hope that our friendship might develop into something deeper. Isabella closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the terrible choice she faced. Margaret was clearly hoping for a romantic declaration from Prince Adrian, unaware that any such proposal would be motivated entirely by political calculation rather than genuine affection. The princess deserved to know the truth about his deception, but revealing it would destroy not only her personal happiness, but also Westbourne's best opportunity for the alliance they desperately needed. "Margaret," Isabella said slowly, "there's something I need to discuss with you about Prince Adrian and the circumstances of his visit." The words were barely out of her mouth when another voice interrupted from the doorway. King Edward entered the study with obvious excitement, carrying what appeared to be an official document that had arrived with the morning correspondence. "Magnificent news," Edward announced, his face glowing with satisfaction. "Prince Adrian has formally requested permission to court Margaret with the intention of marriage. His letter expresses the highest regard for her intelligence and character, and he's offered terms for a political alliance that would solve our financial difficulties and strengthen our position significantly." Isabella felt the world shift around her as she watched Margaret's reaction to this announcement. The princess's face lit up with pure joy, her happiness so radiant that it seemed to illuminate the entire room. She had clearly been hoping for exactly this development, and Edward's news confirmed that her feelings were apparently reciprocated. "He wishes to speak with you privately this afternoon to make his formal proposal," Edward continued, addressing Margaret directly. "I've given my blessing, of course. Prince Adrian seems like an exceptional man, and the alliance would benefit both our kingdoms substantially." Margaret's response was everything Isabella had hoped for during the weeks of careful planning, but now it filled her with anguish rather than satisfaction. "I can hardly believe it," Margaret said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I had hoped, but I wasn't certain whether Prince Adrian shared my feelings." Isabella realized with horrible clarity that she had reached the point of no return. Margaret was moments away from accepting a proposal from a man who despised her, while believing that she had found true love with someone who respected and valued her character. The princess would spend her life trying to please a husband who viewed her intelligence and passion as tedious obstacles to political convenience. But exposing Prince Adrian's deception would destroy Margaret's happiness immediately while potentially endangering Westbourne's survival. The alliance with Eastmarch represented their best opportunity to address the economic and military challenges that threatened the kingdom's future. Isabella's duty to her people demanded that she prioritize their welfare above Margaret's personal feelings, no matter how much she cared about her sister-in-law. The decision that Isabella made in that moment would define not only her own character, but the future of everyone she loved. She looked at Margaret's glowing face, then at Edward's satisfied expression, then back at the correspondence on her desk that contained the evidence of Prince Adrian's cruel manipulation. "Margaret," Isabella said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately before you meet with Prince Adrian this afternoon." Edward looked up from the formal proposal with mild curiosity. "Is there some protocol matter that needs to be addressed? I thought we had handled all the necessary diplomatic procedures." "It's a personal matter," Isabella replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "Something that Margaret should know before she makes any decisions about Prince Adrian's proposal." Margaret's expression shifted to concern as she recognized the gravity in Isabella's tone. "What kind of personal matter? Has something happened that I should be aware of?" Isabella took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would change everything for all of them. She had spent months manipulating events to reach this point, only to discover that she was not the only person who had been deceiving Margaret for political purposes. Now, she had to choose between protecting Margaret's emotional welfare and securing Westbourne's political future. "Last evening, Lady Catherine brought me some information about Prince Adrian that I believe you have the right to know," Isabella said slowly. "It concerns his true motivations for this courtship and his genuine feelings about the relationship he's been developing with you." Margaret's face paled as she absorbed the implications of Isabella's words. "What kind of information?" Are you saying that Prince Adrian has been dishonest about something? Edward stepped forward with alarm. Isabella, surely you're not suggesting that we should question Prince Adrian's sincerity based on secondhand gossip. The political benefits of this alliance are too important to risk over unsubstantiated concerns. But Isabella kept her focus on Margaret's face, watching her sister-in-law process the possibility that the man she had fallen in love with might not be what he appeared to be. The princess was intelligent enough to understand the implications of Isabella's warning, and brave enough to want to know the truth regardless of how painful it might be. "Tell me," Margaret said quietly, her voice steady despite the obvious fear in her eyes. "Whatever you've learned, I need to know the truth before I make any decisions about my future." Isabella felt a profound moment of clarity as she looked at Margaret's determined expression. The princess deserved to make an informed choice about her own life, even if that choice might have devastating consequences for the kingdom's political future. Margaret's autonomy and dignity were worth more than any alliance, no matter how desperately Westbourne needed Prince Adrian's support. Lady Catherine discovered correspondence between Prince Adrian and his advisor that reveals his courtship has been entirely calculated for political purposes, Isabella said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "He has been deliberately manipulating your feelings while privately expressing contempt for your interests and personality. His proposal is motivated solely by political necessity, not genuine affection or respect." The silence that followed Isabella's revelation seemed to stretch endlessly. Margaret's face showed the progression of emotions as she absorbed this information. Shock, hurt, anger, and, finally, a kind of steely resolve that Isabella recognized as her sister-in-law's way of protecting herself from further emotional damage. Edward's reaction was immediate and furious. How dare he attempt such a deception? "I'll have him expelled from the kingdom immediately. No one treats my sister with such disrespect and remains welcome at our court." But Margaret raised her hand to silence her brother's outrage. Her attention focused on Isabella with laser intensity. "How long have you known about this? And, more importantly, what did you know about the circumstances of Prince Adrian's visit before Lady Catherine's discovery?" Isabella felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble as Margaret's analytical mind focused on the implications of the timing and her own role in recent events. The princess had always been too intelligent to be deceived for long, and now her suspicions about the visit's convenient arrangements were crystallizing into understanding of Isabella's manipulation. "I arranged Prince Adrian's visit specifically to facilitate a potential marriage alliance," Isabella admitted, knowing that any further deception would be both impossible and wrong. "I believed that you would be compatible and that the political benefits would serve everyone's interests. I had no knowledge of his deceptive motivations until yesterday evening." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady and controlled. "So both of you have been manipulating me, just in different ways and for different reasons. Prince Adrian deceived me about his feelings, and you deceived me about the circumstances that brought us together." The accusation hit Isabella like a physical blow because it was essentially accurate. She had engineered Margaret's romantic feelings just as systematically as Prince Adrian, even if her motivations had been more benevolent. Both of them had treated the princess as a political asset rather than a person with the right to make autonomous choices about her own life. "Margaret, I believed I was acting in your best interests as well as the kingdom's," Isabella said desperately. "Prince Adrian seemed like a worthy man who would make you happy while also providing the alliance we needed. I never intended for you to be hurt." Margaret stood slowly, her composure intact, but her eyes blazing with a fury that Isabella had never seen before. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority and dignity that would make her a formidable queen for any kingdom fortunate enough to deserve her. "The difference between your manipulation and Prince Adrian's is one of degree, not kind," Margaret said with devastating clarity. "You both decided that I was incapable of making intelligent decisions about my own life. You both chose to deceive me rather than trust me with the truth. And you both prioritize your own goals above my right to autonomy and honesty. Isabella felt the full weight of Margaret's judgment and recognized its absolute justice. She had convinced herself that her deception was motivated by love and concern, but the result had been exactly the same as Prince Adrian's crueler manipulation. Margaret's emotions had been systematically exploited for political purposes. "What will you do now?" Isabella asked quietly, knowing that Margaret had every right to reject both the alliance and any future trust in her sister-in-law's judgment. Margaret's response would determine not only her own future, but the fate of the carefully negotiated political arrangements that Isabella had believed were essential for Westbourne's survival. In that moment, Isabella realized that Margaret's dignity and autonomy mattered more than any alliance, and she was prepared to accept whatever consequences followed from her decision to reveal the truth. "I will meet with Prince Adrian this afternoon as planned," Margaret said with quiet determination, "but not to accept his proposal. I intend to confront him about his deception and make it clear that I am not the naive victim he apparently believes me to be. After that, I will need time to consider what kind of relationship, if any, I can maintain with people who have shown such little respect for my judgment and autonomy." As Margaret turned and left the study with regal composure, Isabella understood that she had irreparably damaged her relationship with the person she had most wanted to protect. The political alliance with Eastmarch was certainly lost, and Westbourne would have to find other ways to address their economic and military challenges. But in choosing to tell Margaret the truth, Isabella had finally acted with the kind of integrity that true leadership required. The Queen returned to her window overlooking the gardens, where autumn's beauty masked the approaching winter that would test Westbourne's strength in ways she had tried so desperately to prevent. But for the first time in months, Isabella felt the peace that came from knowing she had chosen Margaret's dignity over political expediency, even though the cost of that choice remained to be calculated. The moment when Isabella turned away from manipulation toward honesty had come too late to preserve Margaret's trust, but it marked the beginning of a different kind of wisdom about power, love, and the true responsibilities of those who wear the crown.